Hilchos Issurei Mizbeach Perek Revi, the laws of the forbidden entities to the altar, chapter 4. Today is a new month, the month of Av. Traditionally, it's a sad month, Menachem Av. That's the truth. The real name is Menachem Av, the comforting Father, or comfort to the Father. We give comfort to Hashem. It's a sad time. And the Talmud says, Keshem, Misha Nichnas Adar, Marbin Besimcha. The same way when Adar comes in, we increase in joy. Kach, Misha Nichnas Av, Mema'atin Besimcha. So too, when Av comes in, we lessen in joy, decrease in joy. So the simple meaning is, you have to be less joyful. But the Rebbe said, no, we have to punctuate it differently. Misha Nichnas Av, when Av comes in, Mema'atin. How do we decrease all the negative things? Besimcha, through joy. We have to have joy. Ivdos Hashem Besimcha is universal. It applies at all times and all places. You always have to serve Hashem with joy, even when it's rough. And sometimes the opposite, to the contrary. The joy will decrease the negative things. So since it says that studying Torah brings joy, so there's no better way to experience the joy of this time than through learning Torah, especially halacha, Rambam every day. So we're learning about animals that are forbidden to be brought on the Mizbeach. And the first subject for the first couple of chapters was animals with a mum, animals with a blemish, physical defect, deformity. Those are the things that are forbidden to bring on the Mizbeach. But we also mentioned yesterday, and today we're going to dive into it deeply, is any animal that was used in sin. Any animal that was used for an Aveira, whether it was bestiality or murder or other kinds of things, idol worship becomes forbidden. And today we're going to study in depth the parameters for exactly which cases sin disqualifies an animal. So the Rambam says, first as a general rule, halacha aleph, echad ha-behema ve'echad ha'oif. Whether we're talking about an animal or a bird, shenirba, that was used in an act of sodomy, of bestiality, or it murdered a person, or it was set aside for idol worship, or it was actually served, everything is disqualified automatically for the Mizbeach. But that's a very general statement. Now I'll get into the specifics. An animal, male or female, that was used in an act of mating, or murdered a person, if there was two witnesses watching the act, you wouldn't even come to the issue of the Mizbeach, because anyways, Torah says, the animal or the bird gets stoned to death, and their flesh is anyways totally forbidden to have benefit from it. There's no need to say that these things are forbidden to Hashem. Of course, they're going to be stoned anyways, they're going to die anyways. So in which case is the novelty, is the chidush, that they're forbidden to the Mizbeach in a scenario where even though they were involved in a sin, they would be permitted for a regular person. When is that? If there was only, for example, one witness. Only one guy can say, I saw the animal kill somebody else. And the owners are being quiet when accused. Or the owners are testifying. Honest owner comes to court and says, look, I know that my animal killed somebody. I have no testimony to it, but I'm telling you what happened. So then, in those cases, according to halacha, it's permitted to eat it. A regular person can eat it. However, in this case, the Rambam says, the halacha says, it's forbidden to the Mizbeach. What if there was one witness, but the owner is contradicting him? One witness says, your animal killed my animal. He says, no, never happened. So since there's no definitive testimony, even from one witness, because he's being contradicted, there's no definitive testimony that he did anything, so the animal in this case is permitted to the Mizbeach. What if you have an animal who they played with, and they trained it to gore, until it killed somebody? This was very common in times of old. The bullfights, people came to the stadium, they brought a bull inside, and they purposely trained it to fight with a person, and sometimes to kill it. So fascinatingly, even though this animal did kill somebody, but it's kosher for the Mizbeach, it's forced against its will. It's brought into this work, and it's kind of forcibly trained into it. It's not something that did it on its own volition, so you can't hold it accountable. Another rule is, an animal cannot become disqualified on account of being involved in mating with a human until the person who was involved with it is at least 9 years old. Because at 9 years of age, according to halacha, a male's reproductive system is considered to be working, and therefore, bi'asai bi'a, any relations he engages with is considered to be relations, and therefore only then would the animal that he mates with become forbidden. Bein Yisrael, bein Nebet Kechavim, bein Eved, doesn't have to be Jewish, whether it's a Jew, an idol-worshipping Gentile, it's slave, Hoyaluruva, Adam Nifsala. As long as a person mated with it, a male, it becomes disqualified. On the other hand, V'im ha'adam hu shenirba min ha'behema. If it's the person acting as the female, and it was the male that was the animal, Eina nifseles ad shetiya ha'isha ha'nirbas, bas shalei shanim v'yem echad. Then, if it's a female, a woman, she has to be at least 3 years old. Or if it's a man, then 9 years old. That is for mating bestiality issues. At what point does an animal or a bird become disqualified for being set aside for idol worship? That is if the priests that are administering to the idol, once they do an action to the animal that demonstrates their intent to use it for idol worship, then it becomes muktzah. I know we use the word muktzah on Shabbos, you can't touch it. But muktzah means set aside. In this case, set aside for idol worship. What would be such an action? They might shear its wool, or they might work with it, plowing a field or something, with the intent to serve idols. But with simple verbal expressions, they don't become set aside. Someone just says, this sheep is going to be used for tomorrow's idol service. It's not muktzah. The whole concept of verbal declaration or verbal sanctification, which does exist in halacha for Jewish law, if somebody says that this animal is going to be a sacrifice, it becomes holy, that doesn't exist when it comes to idols. Halacha hey, animals that are involved in bestiality, whether it belonged to you or somebody else, whether done under duress or willfully, whether purposely or inadvertently, whether you were aware or not of the prohibition, whether before or after it became consecrated, it becomes automatically forbidden to the Mizbeach. It's an inherent prohibition. It was involved in a problem, so it becomes problematic. But when it's set aside for idol worship, it depends who it belongs to. If the animal belonged to you, you have jurisdiction over it, and it was set aside to idol worship before you had a chance to consecrate it to the Mizbeach, nifsal. That becomes disqualified. But if you would go to somebody else's house, somebody else's animal, say, you know what, I'm going to set aside his animal for idol worship. Or you even set aside your own animal to idol worship, but it was already holy to the Mizbeach, that's permitted. This is a big principle in halacha that applies in many scenarios. You don't have the power to declare something which isn't yours forbidden. So if it's somebody else's animal, of course it's not yours. Even if you already consecrated it in a certain way, it became not yours anymore. It became Hashem's. So you can't then go and set it aside for idol worship. You don't have control over what's not yours. Halacha vav hanevad. If an animal was served, he's serving the sheep. He's choosing to make the sheep an idol. Bein she'avad shaloi, bein shel chaveiroi. Whether you served your own animal or an animal that belonged to a friend. Bein ba'ines, bein beratzein, bein bezadin, bein bishgaga. Whether under duress or willfully, whether purposely or inadvertently, you were aware or not of the prohibition. Bein lifnei hekdesh, bein la'achar hekdesh. Whether before or after it was consecrated. Hareza asur, it is forbidden. Even though we just said that when it comes to setting it aside, it has to be yours, and it has to be before it becomes consecrated. When actually serving it, it could even not be yours, and it could even be after it's consecrated. Because when you do an actual act of Avodah Zarah, that overrides it. The yira, what do you do with it though? The yira sheyipal beimum kavua v'yipada by kamesh b'yarnu. As we explain, what you do with this animal is you put it in the zoo, you let it pasture until another blemish falls onto it, and anyway it has to be redeemed. Then you redeem it and you bring another sacrifice. V'hanevad, when you have an animal that's served as an idol, hu v'chol masha alav asurin la mizbeach. It and anything on it becomes forbidden. They used to sometimes, put ornaments or gold or jewelry, different things and decorations on the animal, once you serve the animal, it and everything attached to it becomes forbidden. Shekol tzipui nevad asurin bahana. This goes way back to the Rambam's first book. The laws of the idol worship is a special mitzvah actually in the Torah, one of the 613 according to the Rambam, that if you have an ornament on an idol and it's served, you can't have any benefit from it. Aval hamuktzeh, but if the animal were to only be set aside, not actually worshipped, hu asur v'mashallah mutal mizbeach. It's forbidden, but what's on it, since it hasn't been served yet, is permitted to the mizbeach. Halacha zayin hamishtacha velahar. If somebody bows down to a mountain, this is actually a picture in Tibet. I don't know if I can show it, it's kosher or not. Whatever. They're walking to this big mountain, I don't know what it is. They bow down to it. On their way over, they prostrate themselves to the mountain. Afal pisha hu mutar bahana. So even though when it comes to the laws of idol worship, it's actually permitted. Because the Rambam says that anything which doesn't have tfisat yad adam, anything which humans don't control or didn't affect, it's like essential to nature, you can't make it idolatrous. So if you bow down to a mountain, even though the mountain remains permitted to have benefit from, any stones that dislodge from the mountain are forbidden to be used to build the Mizbeach. It's a fascinating story. Before we go on, there's a piece of Talmud. The Talmud says in Bava Basra, on page 10, it says, Asara dvarim kashim nivru ba'ilam. There's 10 tough things, 10 hard things in the world. Har kasha, a mountain, is tough. Barzal mechatchoy, but iron can cut it. If you have a quarry, you hew it out. So even though it's rough, but the iron controls it. Barzal kasha, iron is tough. Ur mefafoy, but heat or fire can melt it down. Fire is tough, but water can put it out. Water is tough, but clouds can receive it. Clouds are tough, but the wind can spread them out. Wind is tough, the body can handle it though. The body stands strong. The body looks tough, but fear, it melts us apart. And then when you have some fear, but you take some wine, the wine can help you overcome the fear. So it seems to be like a simple, agadic, homiletic statement that says, how one thing always leads to the other and can always be taken over by something else. But there's a sefer that's once interpreted this line of Talmud as referring to 10 passages in halacha. 10 difficult pieces of Talmud. So there's a piece of Talmud about a mountain. And there's many questions about the mountain piece of Talmud. But the Barzel, the piece of Talmud about the iron, can help answer it. Okay. And then there's a sugya, there's a discussion about iron. And iron can be melted by the sugya about fire. Yeah. And the mountain was this one, this halacha about bowing down to a mountain. So in that sefer, he asks a whole bunch of questions. It could be it's the Neidah B'Yehuda, Rabbi Cheskel Landau. I believe he writes it. And he goes through all the questions on the mountain problem and then how it's answered by the iron sugya. It's a very fascinating thing. Nice. But here, with regards to this Mizbeach, so you cannot use any stones for the Mizbeach. Also, if you bow down to a stream, a spring, if it's going through your land, any water in it is disqualified for using as the water libations on Sukkos. That implies that if it's someone else's, you can't do it. You can't make it forbidden. Kind of like a similar principle as before, that only your own stuff you can have an effect on. Asherah shabatla, an Asherah tree that was cancelled for use. They used to take trees that were growing on mountains in high places, and they used to serve them as idols. And the tree became forbidden to have benefit from. But if the goyim would declare, you know what, we're done with this one, we don't want this tree anymore, that's called an Asherah shabatla. It's an Asherah tree that went out of use. Ein mevi'in mimena gzarim lama'aracha, we still don't bring logs for it onto the Mizbeach. V'chein ha'mishtachava lebehema. So to when you bow down to an animal, kashem shenifsla Mizbeach, the same way the animal is itself forbidden for the Mizbeach, kach tzemer shalah, so to any of its accessories. Its wool, pasol lebigdei kahuna, is disqualified to be used in the clothing of the Kohen Gadol or the Kohen. V'karneha psudim lachatzotzres. Its horns, if it has, are disqualified for being used as trumpets. V'shoikeha lachalilin. Its thighs are prohibited to be used as flutes. Ubnei be'eha lenimin. Its intestines cannot be used for strings on string instruments. Hakol pasol everything is disqualified. And the Rebbe once talked about this halacha actually on his father's yahrzeit, which is coming up, 20th of Av. And he said, although many people point to one piece of Talmud as the source for this, but there's a Mishnah at the end of Tractate Kinim, the end of the entire Seder Kadashim, where it says that there's a popular adage, a popular statement that says, when an animal is alive, it has one voice. When it's dead, it has 7 voices. How so? Because you have a sheep, when it's alive, what does it make? Ba, ba, one voice. Once the sheep dies, you take this, you take the skin, you turn it into a drum. You take the legs, you turn it into a flute. You take this, you make 7 different instruments from it, and it has 7 voices. And the Rebbe examined the nuance of this Mishnah, and in Hebrew it says, Kishu chai koile echad, kishu meis koile shiva. When it's alive, it has one, its voice is 1. When it's dead, its voice is 7. And the Rebbe said from the same wording, koiloi, that means that according to halacha, what you make out of an animal after it's dead is literally its voice. It's an extension of the animal. And from there, the Rambam learned this halacha. Since everything you make from an animal is literally part of the animal, so it follows that whatever is forbidden from the animal is also forbidden to be used for anything holy. And not just because it used to be part of the sheep. That itself, the trumpet itself, the flute itself, the string itself, becomes what's called Shem Avodah Zarah, has the halachic status of idol worship. And therefore you cannot use it for the Mizbeach. Halacha ches. Kol sheyesh by shem la'avodah zarah. In summary, anything which has a name connected to idol worship, lo ye'asa limlechas hakodesh afal pisho mutar b'hana, cannot be used in holy work, even though it's permitted to have benefit from it on its own, but you can't use it in the Beis Hamikdash. And now we move on to the next mitzvah in these laws, Eizehu esnan. Torah says, lo yisavi esnan zoyna u'mechir kelev. You cannot bring the payment for a prostitute or the exchange of a dog on the Mizbeach. What does it mean, payment for a prostitute? Eizehu esnan. What is the meaning of an esnan? Ha'omer lezoyna. The classic case is a person tells a prostitute, Heilich davar zeh bischarech. Here's this animal as payment for your services. That animal becomes disqualified. Echad zeyna kusis, Shifcha, Issurei shehi erva alav v'mechayav elaven. Doesn't matter if she's a non-Jew, or if she's a maidservant, or if she's a Jew who would otherwise be forbidden to him on account of one of the arayot of forbidden relationships. Aval hapnuya, but if she was unmarried. So no biblical prohibition, afilu hayakoyen, even if the person was a kohen, esnana mutar. Any animal given to her as payment is actually permitted to be used on the Mizbeach. V'chein ishtay nida. Similarly, if his own wife was a nida, and you're not supposed to have relations when she's on her period, and a husband would give his wife a payment to nevertheless engage in relations, esnana mutar afal pi shehi erva. Even though such a woman is an erva, but since she's permitted to you inherently, the payment that you give her is permitted. Halacha tes nasa achas mechayav elavin. If a person married against the Torah, somebody who he shouldn't have married, somebody who you're obligated to a negative commandment, for example, a mamzer, someone born from an illegitimate union. Kol sheyitin lamachmas be'ilah hareze esnan v'aser. Since inherently she's forbidden, any animal that would be given to her as a payment for some kind of relations would be an esnan, would be forbidden. The haschur, if somebody approached another man and wanted to engage in homosexuality and gave a payment as an animal as a payment, esnanai aser. The animal given as payment becomes forbidden because it's involved in a forbidden act of relations. Nasna ha'isha esnan laboyel. If it was the opposite, the woman gave the payment to the man, hareza mutar mishum esnan. That is permitted. It's not called an esnan. Torah says esnan zoyna, payment given to the woman, not to the man. Halacha yud ha'omer lachaveira. If someone tells a friend, hey lach davar zeh v'tolin shifchascha eitzel avdi ha'ivri. You own a woman slave. I own a man slave. The halacha is that a Jewish slave is allowed to engage in relations with a non-Jewish maidservant, special dispensation. So the two owners come to each other. One says to the other, look, let's make children that are going to be slaves. So here, take this animal as payment, and let's have your maidservant and my servant sleep together. Hareze esnan, that payment, that animal is called an esnan. But that's provided if he doesn't have a wife and children, the Jewish slave. Because then he's actually forbidden to marry a non-Jewish maidservant. But if he already has a wife and children, as will be explained, he's allowed to also, in addition, engage in relations with a non-Jewish maidservant, therefore it would be permitted. Same thing would apply if somebody tells a prostitute, look, I don't want your services, my friend wants your services. Here, take payment and go be with so-and-so the Jew. Since you facilitated a forbidden relationship, the animal used in payment is called an esnan. If a person, in advance of the services, decided with the prostitute, I'm going to give you only one sheep, and then he ends up giving many sheep as payment. Even if it's 1,000, kulan esnan, Mizbeach. Since the bottom line is you gave them as payment, they're all considered payment, and they're all forbidden to be brought as sacrifice. What if the person gave the payment but never ended up consummating the relations? He said, you know what, I can't do it now. Let it be by you, and later on, when we'll do it, that'll be the advance payment. In the meantime, it's permitted. But once he has relations with her, it's forbidden. And therefore, if she goes and brings it as a sacrifice before they have relations, it's kosher. If she was obligated to bring a sacrifice on a different count, she actually fulfills her obligation with this. And it's only provided that he says it that he says the following: when he gives it to her, when you exceed to me, you're going to acquire it from now. But if he didn't say it to her, he never gave her ownership from now. It's on condition, so she doesn't own it, so she can't bring it as a sacrifice. Same scenario. The guy gives the payment to the prostitute, says, I can't do it now, we'll do it later. She doesn't go and bring it as a sacrifice. She just sanctifies it. And then they have the relations. That is a suffix imhu esnan hoyiluba kedem shatakrivenu. It's a doubt whether it's considered to be a payment, since in the end of the day, the relations happened before the offering. Or maybe it's not a payment because she already consecrated it before the relations. So therefore the halacha is, don't bring it, but if you did, it achieves atonement. What if the opposite? A person had the relations but never paid. He only paid much later after many years. If it's related to the relations, it's a payment. When do we say that a delayed payment is a payment? If it was a guy to whom he said, have relations with me for this sheep. Because a non-Jew doesn't have to do meshicha, doesn't have to bring it into her possession to consider it acquired. Or if it was a Jewish woman, where the sheep was in her courtyard, and he told her, if I don't give you money by this and this day, it's yours. Because a woman could be koine, she could acquire it by something being in her courtyard. But if he simply told a Jewish woman, have relations with me on account of a sheep that I'll give you later. And then he had the relations, and only afterwards sent the sheep. That's permitted. That's not considered to be payment for a harlot, because she never acquired it in advance. The only thing which becomes forbidden when you make this payment, or you make an exchange for a dog, is the body of the animal. Therefore, it could only devolve on something which itself could be brought on the Mizbeach. I know till now we're speaking about a sheep or an animal, but the truth is any food that can go on the Mizbeach also becomes forbidden. Like a kosher animal, turtle doves and pigeons, that we learned about yesterday, 2 types of birds that can be brought as a sacrifice, and wine, oil, and flour. They can all go as part of libations. But if he gave her money, and she uses the money to buy a sacrifice, that's totally fine. Only the money is forbidden, not the sacrifice. What if he gave the harlot wheat, and she turns it into flour? You give her olives, she makes oil. You give her grapes, she makes wine. They're kosher because they've been changed. If you gave her an animal that was already sanctified as payment, was already holy, doesn't become forbidden. Religious prostitutes. He said, look, it's Pesach tonight. You need to bring Passover sacrifice or a chagiga, you can join my group as payment. Lo nifsalu hamukdashin. The sacrifices don't become disqualified on account of that. On the moment you made them holy, Hashem already owns it. You can't step in and ruin that. If he gives him an animal or something, doesn't belong to him. You can't control other people's possessions. You don't disqualify it. You can't forbid that which doesn't belong to you unless the owner is desperate of getting it back. But if you gave her birds, even if they're already consecrated, the payment prohibition devolves on them and they become forbidden. This is a very rare, unique thing that was given through tradition. Halacha Tazayin, going back to the verse, Ezahu mechir kelev. What qualifies as an exchange of a dog? So the classic case is, someone tells a friend, here, you take this sheep instead of this dog. The sheep, having been involved in an exchange with a dog, becomes forbidden. Similarly, if you exchange one dog for multiple kosher animals or birds, they're all forbidden to the Mizbeach. Yud Zayin, consider this case. Two partners owned a bunch of animals, they divided the property. There was 20 animals in the flock, 19 sheep, one dog. So divide it 10 and 10. One partner takes 10 sheep, other partner takes 9 sheep and a dog. She'ima kelev mutarim. All the sheep with the dog are permitted. Aval ha'asara she'kenegdoi. But the 10 opposite ones, for the other partner, there would be an exchange for the dog. And therefore, im yesh echad mehem damei kidmei ha'kelev v'yester al dmei ha'kelev, if one of them is at least worth the worth of the dog or more, moitziyoi min ha'asara keneged ha'kelev v'yiyeh mechira. Take it out from the 10, corresponding to the dog. Let it be the exchange for the dog, and the rest of them are mutter, permitted. But if each individual one is worth less than the dog, all 10 become considered one big exchange for the dog, and they're all forbidden. And that partner loses out. Same as the payment for the zayna. If what you gave in exchange was changed or was processed, let's say you would exchange a dog for wheat, and the wheat became flour, it's permitted. Esnan kelev umechir zayna. This is an animal that was given as payment for a dog. A person wanted to have relations with a dog, and he gave payment for it, or mechir, an exchange given for a prostitute, mutar, and they're permitted. Esnan zayno mechir kelev, the initial prohibitions, mutarin lebed kabayis. Even though we keep on talking about forbidden to the Mizbeach, they are permitted to be used in temple upkeep. Sha'arehin mishtanin. Because by the time you give it to the temple upkeep, and they use it for what they need to use it for, it's going to be changed. Nobody uses an actual animal for temple upkeep. You sell it, you get money, you do repairs. But indeed, if the body of the payment was able to be used, somebody gave gold, let's say, to a prostitute. You can't use the gold to plate or to paint the Beis HaMikdash. Shenemar, as it says, l'chol neder. This verse over here, you don't bring the esnan zayno mechir kelev for any promise. L'havi es harikoyim. That includes plating, wallpaper, covering the wall with things that are actual, inherently forbidden, is forbidden. To use it in exchange and to put it in temple upkeep, that's permitted.